Good morning, and thank you so much for joining me for Daily Spark with Dr. Angela. I am Dr. Angela Chester. My guest today is Robert Martin Bishop, and he is the author of i-jetebais. So what are we talking about today? How human arrogance makes us susceptible to temptation. This award-winning book, according to Pacific Book Awards for Best Fiction, i-jetebais chronicles the eons-old life of a fallen angel, eponymously named Jetebais. Through his confessions, dictated to a sleeping priest, the reader is shown how the fall of Satan might have happened, as well as a front row seat to the creation. The story shows Old and New Testament events, including the fall of man, Abel's murder, the flood, and the Last Supper. The book then moves into real time when the priest awakens to Jetebais and becomes his ally in the mission to expose Satan and save humanity from him and his legions. Now, I don't know about you, but that sounds like a really awesome book, something that you could really sink your teeth into. Well, let me tell you a little bit more about Robert. Robert Martin Bishop was born in 1953 in Brooklyn, New York, where he lived with his parents and two older siblings. His father was a Lutheran pastor, and his mother was a teacher. In 1961, his family moved to Bristol, Connecticut, where his father became pastor of a Lutheran church and school. Life as a PK, or a pastor's kid, in 1960s Bristol immersed Robert in theology and in the intricacies of relationships between the various churches and religions in that relatively small town. The divisions that exist between the church and Bristol, such as nuns from the Catholic Church and school across the street, began by his priest to walk on the sidewalk in front of the Lutheran Church, shaped his thinking about the integration and separation that exists in faith. This led him to ponder the integration and separation inherent in the story of the angels and Satan. Having attended a Lutheran elementary school where he was rather insulated from the outside world, moving on to public high school was both exciting and eye-opening. He discovered, among many other things, that while he and his former classmates were academically prepared extremely well, and the same was true for many of his Catholic-educated friends, that he was unprepared for the noise of life in the public realm. Everything was new to him, and it took him a couple of years and a stint as an exchange student in Germany before he felt comfortable interacting with people he didn't know. Bishop attended Wagner College in Staten Island, New York. It was while he was creative writing professor, founded and first editor of the New York Quarterly, William Packard. The assignment was simply to write a dialogue between two entities that would leave the reader wanting to know what would happen next. Some 40 years later, and with a few small adjustments, that dialogue eventually became the prologue to his book, i-jetebais. Robert always had the desire to teach, but open teaching positions were not to be found in the mid-70s. He took a job with the manufacturer from whom he had worked that previous summer. He began in the machine shop and shipping room, but 3 years later, he was field sales manager. In 2005, he moved to Ocala, Florida, with his then 15-year-old son, who enrolled as a sophomore at the local Lutheran high school. The following year, 3 days before school was to start, Bishop got a call from the school principal, who asked him if he'd be interested in teaching U.S. history and English. He jumped at the chance. It was the only job he ever truly loved. After retiring from sales and management, then retiring from teaching high school, he was finally able to fulfill his dream of writing his book. So, and that book again is i-jetebais. So what are we talking about? How human arrogance makes us susceptible to temptation. So let's go on and get started with this awesome interview that I know is about to happen, because I am curious to find out more about this book. Good morning, Robert. How are you? Thank you so much for joining me on Daily Spark with Dr. Angela.
Good morning. I'm honored to be here.
Thank you so much for being here. And I just want to ask you so many questions. So let me start as best I can at the very beginning, and that is, what was your motivation, or what was your reason for writing about this particular subject at this particular time?
Well, the original, or the thought rather, that, or the question, if people can be forgiven for what they do, could a fallen angel also be forgiven? Mm-hmm. And I don't know what that says about my character, worrying about, if they could be forgiven, so, gosh, could I? But that was always sort of playing in the background of my mind. And then when Professor Packard gave that assignment, really almost as soon as I put the period at the end of the last sentence, I said, this has to be the prologue of a book. Mm-hmm. And over time, years in fact, the book just sort of unfolded. Actually, that's kind of a lie. What unfolded was I kept the prologue, and I knew exactly what the second epilogue was going to be. Mm-hmm. But I really had no idea how to put the middle together. I named the character i-jetebais. Some people say i-jetebais, and it's spelled i-jetebais, which means I kiss you in French, which is sort of how the character would communicate with people, or to whisper in their ear to cause them to do great evil. But that's basically all I knew. So once I retired, it took me 2 years to connect the beginning and the end with it. Mm-hmm. So why did I write it? I wrote it for a couple of reasons. First of all, it was, had been banging around in my head for 40 years, and I just had to get it out. And that's not, I'm no kidding. And the other reason was that when I first sat down to write, and my hands were on the keys and doing nothing, I said a little prayer, and I said, God, let's get people talking about God again. Mm-hmm. And let's get people maybe realizing what's going on in the world from the standpoint of, what makes us do these awful things that we do. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And it just turned out to be, in my view anyway, arrogance. Mm-hmm. So there you go.
Mm-hmm. I love that. Now, with being the author of a book, many times people write from an understanding that my target audience is this. You have an ideal reader in mind. Would you say that as you were writing that you had a target reader in mind, or is this book really just open for anyone who's curious and simply wants to know more?
Actually, you put it very well. I think anybody who's curious and likes something that, isn't, dime store novel kind of thing, that person would like the book, I think. Anybody who enjoys things like the Da Vinci Code would like the book. And, I have to admit, being an English teacher, I put a lot of stuff in there that what I call breadcrumbs, or actually I should say what a reviewer called breadcrumbs, that, I sort of leave here and there that, I always used to ask my students, okay, now what gives you an indication that this is going to happen 30 pages later?
Right.
So there's just sort of all that mixed in there.
But it's really, if we think about it, we love that. We love those breadcrumbs for the person who's trying to immerse themselves in a really good novel. You want to be able to kind of walk around in the words. You want to try to put yourself in the position of, take me on the journey. I want to be able to walk down the street just like the author wanted me to. So for those who like that type of thing, and yes, Da Vinci's Code, read it, loved it, watched it, loved it. It's going to be exciting. It's very much going to be exciting. So thank you for mentioning that. That might be the one thing that says, for someone says, yes, I'm going to get the book because of that. Now, since the novel has so much to do with, let's say, religion, and to a great degree the Catholic Church within religion. Would someone have to be a religious person in order to understand it? Do they have to, be a regular church attendee in order to follow along on bits and pieces of it?
No, not a bit. I think having a religious background might make things sort of fold more easily into your understanding. If you know nothing at all about God and angels and stuff like that, it would just be pure fantasy. If, on the other hand, you are a religious person, two comments I got from reviewers in that regard. One said, after reading this book, I think that's probably exactly how it happened. And someone else said, after finishing this book, I have a lot more hope than I used to have. And my faith increased 100-fold. So, you hear stuff like that and you're saying, oh, man, I must have gotten some help with this book.
Right. I love it. And, that it's interesting that you said that, because that was going to be a question that I wanted to ask. Do you, as an author, do you pay attention to the reviews that you get, the good and the bad?
Oh, absolutely. I've had one bad review that somebody put up, left there for a month, and took down, that just complained that there are some words in it he didn't understand. So far, that's the only negative that I've gotten. I'm really pleased with it. There aren't that many reviews yet, but the reviews that I've gotten are really thrilling.
And I challenge people to, if there's ever a phrase or something that they don't understand, we live in the world of Google, and that is a good thing. And I don't mean this as an insult, but I mean it from the aspect of, not only are you going to be able to enjoy the book that you're reading, but if you don't understand something, that gives you an opportunity to Google it, find out what it is. Now you're learning about something else, or you have a new understanding of what that particular word means. And it just increases your knowledge base by having read the book. So I'm glad that they were able to, maybe someone said, well, did you Google it? And they were able to go back and, find out and then reread that particular passage and have a new understanding. So that's really great. Yes. We enjoy having the good reviews, but you can definitely learn sometimes from the negative reviews if you get them as well. So we only have about a minute or so left, Robert, and I want to make sure that our listeners know, how can we not only pick up a copy of your book, of course, but how do we stay in contact with you?
Pretty easily. Actually, Amazon, Books A Million, Barnes & Noble, Goodreads, a lot of places are offering the book. I'm not sure how many shelves it's actually on, but it's easily ordered through those outlets. And what was the other question? I'm sorry, I lost. Oh, how to get in touch with me. Yeah, sure. Either robertmartinbishop@gmail.com or robertmartinbishop.net is the website.
Alrighty, listeners, you know where to go to pick up a copy of this book. We'll be back right after this.
Are you ready to ignite your Christianity? Grab your copy of this amazing new book called A Heart Aflame, 10 Days to Ignition by top author John Willis Williams Jr. This book will give you the spiritual passion you need and will get you moving forward in your faith. This book will be hard to put down. It's now available at Amazon, iTunes, and Barnes & Noble. A Heart Aflame by John Willis Williams Jr. Get your copy today.
Hi everyone, Dr. Angela here. Did you know that Daily Spark is now on Facebook? That's right, you can visit with me at facebook.com/Daily Spark with Dr. Angela. I want to know more about what you're thinking. I'd love to know, which interview did you find the most entertaining? or the most informative. I want to talk to you, and I want you to be able to talk to me. Simply visit facebook.com/Daily Spark with Dr. Angela.
And we are back. Thank you so much for joining me for a Daily Spark with Dr. Angela. I am your host, Dr. Angela Chester. My guest today is author Robert Martin Bishop, and he has written the intriguing book, I-jetebais. We're talking about how human arrogance makes us susceptible to temptation. So, Robert, I would like to ask, most people think about sin and evil as the work of Satan or the devil or Diablo, whatever name you want to give to him. But your book refers to Satan's legions. Now, even the names of some of his followers, and some people may not necessarily be familiar with that. Can you explain what do you mean by that? And who are these people? Who is this legion of folks?
Well, the story that I had always sort of grown up with and heard, or at least thought I heard in my own mind, was that Satan, began to look at himself as being, I guess in today's lingo, all that, and really thought that he was something else, and that he wanted to be on the same level or even higher than God. And one hears, you hear or rather read in Revelation and so forth that, there was a battle. So you can't have a battle with one person. So it just followed with me that Satan has to have had. If you believe in angels, God's angels, you have to believe that, there are Satan's angels as well. So that sort of grew into a whole lot of research and lore that's out there of a number of, for want of a better word, demons or fallen angels who are named in various places. There's a book in the Roman Catholic Bible that mentions a demon's name, and there's just all kinds of lore out there. One of the ones in my book is Arrogance, whose job it was to teach mankind to do magic and cast spells and stuff like that. And there were many others there, so I just chose from them to add them to the book. But I definitely feel like, Satan isn't working alone. I think, anytime you're troubled or doing something or someone, is maybe whispering in your ear saying, hey, you know what she did to you? You know what he did to you?
Right.
I think you ought to get him back. That kind of thing.
You're so right. And I remember I'm old enough to remember the cartoons where they used to have the little angel on your shoulder and the devil on your shoulder. I don't think they do that anymore. But I remember that, and it was such a ingenious way of showing how you really do have those moments where you're trying to choose left or right, up or down, and how sometimes you listen to the incorrect side, or you're pulled in a certain direction, and it's just not what's best for you, at all. So my question to you is do you feel that that these angels, that Satan is eternally living from the perspective of creating havoc, creating chaos, that is his main function, that he will just absolutely never rest?
I believe that he will never rest. I think his main goal is to shame or cause God pain. And the way he does that is with you and me, God's children. If he can make us do things that God would not approve of, and horrible things, or just little things, whatever, then that is a weapon. We are a very potent weapon that he uses, and our own human arrogance sometimes allows us to do things that we wouldn't otherwise do. And it's interesting you made that reference to the little angels on your shoulder. I thought a lot about that. And of course I never did that, but that's sort of a concept in my mind anyway that I was using as whispering in your ear. And I remember I was just a little kid. I must have been, 5 or 6. And one of those scenes with, it might have been Bugs Bunny or something, I don't know. These angels appeared on somebody's shoulders, and I asked my mother about that, and she says, well, the one with the halo is his conscience. And then we got into a discussion about what your conscience is. And the other one is, a bad angel or a fallen angel. So, and that concept just sort of always stayed with me.
And it was such a powerful concept, but yet so easy for a child to understand. It was absolutely perfect. Now, in your book, you mention prophets, or I'm sorry, the worst of some of the false prophets. When you talk about that, what are you referencing?
Well, again, there's, I think human arrogance goes into that too. And in biblical times and sometime after, there were a ton of prophets out there that were just, basically babbling gibberish, or were out for their own good to sort of build their own power among their people. So they would call themselves prophets. As far as the worst of the false prophets, I think people can look around at the world today and, based on phraseology in the book, they can make up their own minds who the worst false prophet is.
And I think you are so correct about that. How many people have simply called themselves a prophet for self-gain due to this arrogance that you're talking about, that they feel that their way is the best, and we know who the true prophet is. So thank you for mentioning that in the book and addressing that. Now, near the resolution of the story, the book depicts Pope Francis as being influenced by Satan to involve himself in politics. Some prominent religious leaders, the Pope, for example, involve themselves in the political arena all the time. Or do you think that we should have this universal understanding of separation between church and state, that faith is one thing and politics is another?
Well, for sure, religion is one thing and politics is another. That I'm not a big proponent of separation of church and state. It's not a separation as much as we'll leave you alone if you leave us alone kind of thing. As far as the reference in the book to the Pope being influenced and so forth, that was part storyline and part kind of what I grew up with. I look at it this way: if a parent does his job, then all you can really do is, when the child gets to be in the teen years and late teen years especially, all you can do is cross your fingers and anything else you can cross and hope that they make good decisions, or at least learn from the bad ones, and then move on. And I feel the same way about clergy. If the clergy is doing its job, if your pastor or priest or rabbi is doing his job and teaching the tenets of Judeo-Christian philosophy, then he shouldn't have to comment on political issues or push for anything political. I don't think that's his place. His place is to shepherd his flock, if you will, and leave the people to play the politics. At least that's how I look at it.
Great explanation. I can understand. And as they say, there's nothing that gets the conversation going like talking politics and religion. So I can understand that.
How many Thanksgiving dinners are a testament to that, huh?
It's time to leave early. Yep.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I think I left the iron on. Yeah. Yep.
Exactly. Oh, well, that's so funny. So funny. I know there's someone else nodding their head saying, "Oh goodness, yes, that's so funny." Now, we were talking about forgiveness earlier, and the question that was posed, if I'm forgiven, can the fallen angels be forgiven? How does this all fit together in the very big scheme of things? Now, it seems that what happens if i-jetebais turns from doing evil to confessing and seeking forgiveness? And I think that is a wonderful question that you kind of address in the book. What would happen? How does that work?
Well, in the way I imagined it, actually, let me start with another story from childhood that kind of almost gave me the background to write about i-jetebais. Mm-hmm. I had my grandmother's sister, so I had a great aunt who was a teacher. She was rather elderly even when I was little, and but the word atheist came into my vocabulary at a pretty young age, and mm-hmm. Auntie, as we called her, was an atheist. She didn't think there was anything to church. She liked my mm-hmm. dad, who was a pastor, but didn't think mm-hmm. a thing about it. Well, she got weaker and weaker, of course, as people do, and she died. And mm-hmm. I think I want to say I was like 10, 11, 12, something like that. Mm-hmm. And so I asked my father, I said, what happens to Auntie? She's, she was an atheist. Mm. And his answer was, well, it's not for us to say. I said, you never know. Or he said, you never know. God might have found a way. Mm-hmm. And I just think that's true of anything and anybody. Mm-hmm. We don't know, and it's, I'd be the last person to say, well, you're going to hell. It's just, it's simply not for us to say. Mm-hmm. So when I wrote about i-jetebais, I thought, okay, he wants to confess. And why does he want to confess? Mostly because he is extraordinarily remorseful, and how he gets there is part of how the story works, so I don't want to give it away. But mm-hmm. And he's desperate to expose Satan and his legions so that we are no longer tempted by them. Because if we know they're there, anonymity, of course, I'm sure you were taught in Sunday school, anonymity is the best weapon they have. Mm-hmm. If we know they're there, well, then they become useless to us or useless to themselves. They're not going to bother us at all. Mm-hmm. So that was part of it, to expose them. And it's important to note that he says, while he's doing this, that he doesn't care at all for his own person. Yes, he would love to be forgiven, but that's not his main goal. His main goal is to expose Satan, and whatever happens to him, that's fine. So anyway, that was my thought process as I was writing that.
Mm-hmm. Well, it is time for us to go to break, listeners. I know the conversation was getting good. Well, Robert, I want to make sure that those that are listening are able to find you online. Could you mention your website one more time?
Sure. Website is robertmartinbishop.net.
Alrighty, listeners, we'll be back right after this.
Hi everyone, Dr. Angela here. Did you know that Daily Spark is now on Facebook? That's right, you can visit with me at facebook.com/Daily Spark with Dr. Angela. I want to know more about what you're thinking. I'd love to know which interview did you find the most entertaining or the most informative. I want to talk to you, and I want you to be able to talk to me. Simply visit facebook.com/Daily Spark with Dr. Angela.
And we are back. Thank you so much for joining me for Daily Spark with Dr. Angela. I'm your host, Dr. Angela Chester. My guest today is author Robert Martin Bishop, and he has written a quite intriguing book entitled I-jetebais. So we're talking about how human arrogance makes us susceptible to temptation. Now, before we went to break, Robert, you were talking about jetebais and the fact that he might be kind of changing his mind a little bit or starting to regret some of the decisions that he's made. So my question is, now that he regrets and he's thinking maybe I shouldn't have left heaven, and he wants to confess and even maybe, ask to be forgiven. Can I come back to heaven? And all of those questions that would be, in your mind when you're trying to get back in, when you're trying to get under God's good grace again. Do you think that it's possible that God could forgive something like that? That even though we've been told one thing, but is it possible?
That's a really good question. And I wish I had a definitive answer for you, but I don't. I can tell you that I once asked my dad, I was probably 10 years old or something, and I said, do you think Satan could ever be forgiven? Mm-hmm. And it was an absolute no. I mean, there wasn't any doubt about that one. Mm-hmm. No. But I began to think, okay, I can buy that. Because he kind of started the whole thing, but what about what about one of these other guys? What do kids think about you? How am I going to get around this rule? Mm-hmm. So that's kind of what I did. As to whether or not it's possible, is it possible that one of these folks would feel regret? I think so. So but I don't. Like I said, I wish I had a definitive answer for you. I just don't.
Right. And it's one of those things that you do just kind of roll it around sometimes, and you go, well, and I like your answer. It's like, well, Satan, hey, he started this mess. So he may not necessarily have a change of heart, but others may have a change of heart. And I think many people can kind of relate to that, where you were going down a particular path and something happens and you go, whoa, wait a minute, this isn't the way that I meant to go, or this wasn't my intention. And sometimes you do have a change of heart. So that's another conversation to kind of get the conversation going. And
right.
We don't really know definitively, like you said, what way God will take that. Now, have you received any pushback about tackling this subject, or has anyone ever objected to you and your depiction of the church or the Catholic Church when it comes to your book?
Interestingly, no. Not about the Catholic Church. I was fearful that people would think that I was attacking the church in some way, and I certainly am not. It's I have nothing but respect for the Catholic Church. After all, they gave us the Bible. They kind of started the whole thing, but. I kind of throw a little dig in here and there about the Catholic Church, but the question, my best answer to the question, though, is the pushback that I've gotten isn't from Catholics. Mm-hmm. For a period of time, I kind of drove up and down the East Coast, stopping at bookstores here and there, and stopped at a store in South Carolina, and handed the book to the store owner, and as soon as the words fallen angel came out of my mouth, you could see the color leave her face. She couldn't wait to get the book out of her hands. And she gave it back to me, and I mean, she was very polite, but she was scared to death. And you know, I wonder about that, because if you're worried that talking about Satan or talking about fallen angels, if you're worried about that, don't you think that our guy is bigger and badder?
Right.
I mean, you know, what are you worried about?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So that's really the only pushback that I've gotten. And there was one other store that did that. And I just, okay, you know, what can you say to that? I'm certainly not going to argue it. And the other thing is, I mean, for heaven's sakes, it's fiction. Or at least, you know, I think it's fiction. So what are we worried about? I just don't know. So that to answer your question, that's all the pushback that I've gotten. And you asked a question earlier, you know, what kind of have I gotten any bad reviews? I have a verbal review from somebody who said it was just so hard to get through the first section. And I think I should probably address that a little bit. i-jetebais is eons-old. There's no word he doesn't know. There's no language he doesn't know. But he's not human. So he speaks the way I kind of imagined he would as he's dictating this story to a sleeping priest. And it is, you just have to sort of get through that to get through the history, and then all of a sudden the priest wakes up and bang, we're in modern day, and you know, you might as well be reading a Nero Wolfe novel at that point, as far as you know, how the story moves on. So
I find that to be so intriguing, because for me, as I read any particular book, I visualize what I'm reading. So it's like I'm reading the script to the future movie. So when I hear that, I can imagine that in the movie version of your book, look at me, you know, projecting that out there for you. When I see the movie version of it, then it changes time period, and it becomes very relevant to that particular moment. Because if the setting is a particular time period, like when we're watching something and it's in the 1600s, they're not going to use the same vocabulary that we do now. And if they're dressed appropriately, then they should speak appropriately. So for me, I see that as it's giving you time and space, that you can see the evolution of that moment to the current moment. But I also know that not everyone, you know, is able to create the picture in their mind as they read. But that was, to me, quite smart to be able to do that, so you could see how time has had its effect, and how things have evolved, but yet how things have stayed the same throughout time when it comes to certain things.
Exactly, and there's even a reference to that very soon after the priest wakes up, and i-jetebais is trying to go on with his confession, and the priest says, "For heaven's sakes, you're talking about things that happened, you know, 1,000 years ago. You know, what about, you know, more recently?" And what he points out is, you know, look at what's going on. I mean, talk about the Crusades. You don't think that had an effect, you know, even today, or you know, the whole, you know, when the Bible was put together and canonized. It just, all these things affect us today. So.
Yes.
You know, history has a real effect even on us right now.
So true, so true. Anyone who decides that they're going to pick up a copy of i-jetebais and make it their own, what do you hope they take away from reading your book?
Well, I hope they take away some hope. I hope, as one person told me, that they're faith increases, because maybe the book will just open their imagination a little bit. Mm-hmm. And I hope they're willing to talk about and argue if necessary. I don't think God cares if it's an argument or not, about morality and the existence of religion and so forth. And maybe put a little bit of imagination and think about, you know what? Some things have been happening lately. Maybe it really is somebody whispering in my ear. So, good and bad. And that's really what I want them to take away: hope, faith, and a belief that things can get better and will get better.
That things can get better and they will get better. I love that answer. Well, I have to ask, I know that this book is doing so well. Will there be a sequel to this book, or is this a standalone?
There's a sequel in the works right now. No, Lord only knows how long it's going to take me to finish it. But this one took me 2 years. Actually, 42 years. But
right.
I'm quite sure the sequel won't take me that long. But I would expect it to be out next year.
That is so awesome. That is so awesome. And I'm going to congratulate you ahead of time, because I know that it is going to come to fruition. Now, the next set of questions that I have for you are just author type questions for someone out there who may be an inspiring author and they're trying to wrap their heads around all of this. I like to ask the question about atmosphere, and that is, in the movies we used to see the person that would go off to the log cabin, them, their typewriter, and a couple of changes of clothes. What type of atmosphere or environment do you need when it comes to writing? Are you a loner? Are you, let's go to coffee shop, laptop, and you're happy? What do you need in order to write successfully?
I'll tell you exactly what I needed, because it's what I experienced. I had retired, but my wife was still working, so most of the time I was home by myself. But there are dogs, pets, whatever. And I had a really hard time, especially writing the end to the book. I was probably 3/4 of the way through it, and I just couldn't get going. Finally, my wife got tired of me talking about it, and I would like to say she kicked me out of the house. And I rented a cottage, and I stayed there, and it was perfect. I could leave and go get groceries, but I could close the door, and that was it. I didn't hear another thing. And that's really what I needed. I needed to be alone with my thoughts. And while we're on the subject of writing and so forth like that, the biggest challenge for me, not so much in writing the book, but in getting it published and so forth, that's a whole new world that I knew nothing about.
Yeah.
And I finally, after a couple of fits and starts, I finally hooked up with someone named Dexy Queens, who owns or runs Book Agency Plus and Book Trail Agency, and she's just been of immeasurable help for information and advice and so forth like that. And I wish I had had that in the beginning. But so anybody who's looking to write a book, research, and feel free to get a hold of me on the website, and I'll answer any question you have.
And thank you for mentioning that. As we close out and end our show, I want to make sure that everyone is able to get in contact with you and, of course, purchase your book. If you can, for the last time, Robert, please mention, how do we follow you online?
Sure. You can get me on Facebook, Robert Martin Bishop page, or robertmartinbishop.net. And I'm also occasionally on Twitter, but not very often, at Robert Martin Bishop.
All righty. Well, Mr. Robert Martin Bishop, thank you so much for being on Daily Spark with Dr. Angela today. I've enjoyed my time with you.
I have very much enjoyed chatting with you. This was a lot of fun, and I really appreciate being on with you.
Thank you. And listeners, thank you so much for joining us this morning as well. We hope that you have learned a lot and that you will pick up a copy of i-jetebais. It is available where books are sold. And as always, may the Lord continue to shine his face upon you. May you receive his grace and his mercy in all that you do. Until next time, everyone, be blessed in the Lord. Have a great day. Bye-bye.